Here's the thing, and this is our service today, our message, which is the fruits of the Spirit. To accept Christ does mean a change in behavior. It does mean that things will be different. I cannot accept Christ and remain the same. I cannot ask God to forgive me without asking Him also to change me, without wanting Him to desire to make me a new person. And I don't know about you, but I've got a pear tree out in my yard, and it every year bears pears. And I can go out there and look and look and look in those branches for an apple, but I'm never going to find an apple in a pear tree, am I? That's because it's a pear tree. It bears the fruit that its genetics say it should. And the truth is, that is the same with people. The kind of fruit you bear tells an awful lot about who you are and what you are. And the Bible is very clear that there are fruits of the Spirit and works of the flesh, or what I would call fruits of the flesh. They are distinctly different. They are distinctly identifying where my heart lies. And unfortunately, as most of you, as I look down through the list, I find myself too often with way too many fruits of the flesh and not enough of the fruits of the Spirit. We're going to start our scriptures today in Galatians 5:13 through 26. For you were called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing things you want to do. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissension, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, and faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. And those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. Galatians is very clear. You can't do both the world and God's way of doing it. The fruits of the flesh are really quite obvious. There's anger, there's divisions, there's idolatry, there's envy. It's obvious. And I would have to suggest to you that you know people just like that. I would suggest to you that you see people every day who the fruits of the flesh are very, very much a part of their life. Their lives are miserable in many ways because they have the fruits of the flesh. In contrast, the fruits of the Spirit are quite different. And I'm here to tell you that if you are involved with God, He is slowly trying to get you to produce fruits of the Spirit. You will find yourself not wanting the fruits of the flesh as much as you once did. Matthew 7:15 through 20 says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but diseased trees bear bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. For good or bad, my fruit's going to tell the world an awful lot about me. And there are days where it may tell things that I don't want it to tell. It may tell things that I may wish I could have kept secret. But the truth of it is, it's going to be obvious. I can tell you that, as I've shared with you many times before, that a lot of my life was spent in frustration and anger and unforgiveness. And to be honest with you, it was obvious to everyone around me. The irony is, I just did the funeral for my ex-chief of police. And I was joking there, and I told you guys too, there were folks that looked at their bulletin, looked up, looked at the bulletin, and like, Rick Bachman, pastor? And there was a bit of shock in that, because they remembered a hard-nosed cop with very little compassion, with very little love. And their attitude was, man, that does not seem like the pastoral kind of guy. And it's funny because I've had people in the church since who go, Rick, you're naive and you're just, delusional, and you just have way too much compassion. You give people too much credit. And I'm going, boy, I need to introduce you to some folks that knew me 20 years ago, because, man, you two would have a great time trying to figure out who you were talking about. They're two different people. And I love that. I am thrilled by the fact that I am two different people than what I was. Because so much of my early life was caught up being in the fruits of the flesh. I was so much, even though I was a Christian, the produce that I was putting out, the world saw clearly a man who had too much anger and who really, quite frankly, was not following God the way God desired him to. In Matthew, Jesus says there will be a day of reckoning for those who want to follow the fruit of the flesh. There will be, as with a bad fruit tree, a day the axe comes to the root and it will be thrown into the fire. Too many people today do not want to talk about judgment or hell. But I'm here to tell you, you cannot talk about God's love without talking about hell. The greatest love verse in the world, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish. The one verse that is dedicated to love speaks of the fact that some will perish, and that God desires that not to be the case. It is God's desire to reach out and say, I will rescue you, if you will but let me. But he is also not a God who's going to force himself upon you. He is a God who is going to allow you to make your own free will. And I'm here to tell you, that can be a long and hard process. For me, it was an extremely long and hard process. Like a fruit tree that needs pruning, God had to spend a lot of time working on me. I had some branches that really needed cut off badly because they were rotten. They held on to anger too long. They held on to hatred. They held on to a lot of things that were not productive in a Christian walk. And God had to come in with a saw and say, Rick, it's time we remove these. And as any time you see pruning going on, it looks kind of pretty traumatic. You go, man, how can you cut branches off of a tree? How will it survive? But anyone who has fruit trees will tell you it's an essential part of that tree's growth and health. God is going to look in my heart, and he is going to examine me, and he's going to say, what are the fruits in your heart? And if he sees fruits of flesh, God's desire is, I want to take that out of you. And the sad truth is, we sometimes get reluctant to do that. You know that one word that we all hate so much called change? And I will tell you that in my life, there were times when God wanted to change things, and I'm like, I don't think so, God. Kind of dug my heels in, and I kind of wanted to not do that. And it took time for God to do that. Now, I will say that through that process, God had plenty of opportunity and justification to chop me down and throw me in the fire. God could have and should have probably, by man's standards, given up on me many decades ago. So when I stand before you today talking about this, I do not make assessments and a judgment on anyone else. I'm speaking purely from my personal experience of what God did in my life, what I saw him doing, and how he made those changes over many decades. But I think the beautiful thing is that as God continued to prune, develop, I started to put out good fruit. The anger that was so much a part of me, the unforgiveness that I was so much a part of. As a police officer, I saw the guilty and the innocent, two different separate groups. And man, I had zero compassion for the guilty. I saw how they preyed upon the nice people of the world, and I saw how terrible they were, and I wanted to send them to jail. Now, the fact that guilty should be punished is not a proper attitude. But when I start to become the arbiter of that judgment, when I start to tell you who deserves Christ and who doesn't, I'm in a dangerous place. My friends, I have seen people that I would have sworn would never accept Jesus Christ. I have seen people that I would have guaranteed you would never darken the doors of a church who are now in church. And some of us are even pastors. You notice I said us? Because there were points in my life where I really would not have bet on this process for me. We are a people who are like fruit trees. We need to be pruned. And even as God has pruned me in my decades before, he is continuing that process. I am not there yet. Indeed, I can very much wake up today with the fruits of the flesh very much evident. And you know the sad part of it is, they seem to produce themselves at the most worst possible time that you can do. I sometimes open my mouth and say things that I'm going, why did I just say that? If I'd have thought 10 seconds, I would have never said those words. And yet I did. The fruits of the flesh will always be a part of me. They will always challenge me. The thing that has changed, however, is my desire. I suddenly see those fruits of the flesh in a different light than I did before. Where at one time, I had a right to be angry. Anybody ever felt you had a right to be angry? We all do. You have all been wronged in some place, sometime. You have a right to that anger. That's what Satan will tell you. Don't give it up. You have every right to be angry because of that. But you know what? As long as I hold on to that right, I can't let go and accept the love that God says I can take that anger and I can turn it into love. There was a time, And I've shared my testimony on many occasions about my dad. But when I was very, very young, maybe 6 or 8 years old, a neighbor kid that was about 8 to 10 years older than me had a father just like mine. He beat his kids, he beat his wife. And one day this boy, 13 to 15 years old, had enough. He got up and he started to hit back. And by the time it was all over, he had taken a chair and busted it over his father's back and put him in the hospital. It's a small town in Liscombe. I heard that story quickly. So did my father. The minute I heard it, little 8-year-old me says, one day, that'll be me. One day, I will do that. What I didn't know was my father heard the same story, and my father had the same exact thought. One day, that boy is going to hit me back. The last day my father hit me, I was 14, 15 years old, and by that point I could have probably taken him. I didn't have that confidence, and I believe God held that confidence from me. But my dad had me down on the floor and he was kicking me after he'd hit me several times. And he suddenly stopped and backed up and looked at my arms. And at the end of my arms were 2 fists. The beating stopped. And from that point on, my dad never hit me again. He did begin to threaten to kill me. At that point, the threats of death were there. What I did not know was the fruits of the flesh were still very much a part of my life and were very much a part of my father's life. Now, the beautiful thing is, God kept us both in fear of each other. I am amazed by the fact that after he passed, my mom and I had conversations. And as a police officer, I carried a gun all the time. And when I go to visit my parents, it upset my dad. He never said it to me, but he would say it to my mom. It upset him that I had a gun on. Well, he'd already put a gun to my head at once. I did not realize that my father was as afraid of me as I was of him. That's what the fruits of the flesh do to you. It separates you, and you have this right, and you hold on to that right to be angry. And my friends, as long as I held on to that right, I could never learn to forgive. I could never heal from the damage that was done. I can tell you today that when my father died from a heart attack, it took him a fair amount of time before the ambulance got there, and he did pass away. He made amends with my mother. He apologized, and he said things to her that said he knew he was wrong and sorry. And my hope is that he had time to make amends with God. The man was an atheist all his life. He lived a sick and deplorable life all of his life. But the moments before he died, he had the potential to come before Jesus and say, "Take this away from me." And God would and did, if that is the case, take it away. It is my prayer that that's the prayer he had, and that I will see him in heaven. I can take that hope because I've surrendered the right to my anger. I have said, you know what? Yes, I have rights. But not all my rights are good. Not everything that I feel is positive and good for me. I see so many bitter people holding on to their bitterness and their anger and their unforgiveness because they were justified in that. And what they needed to do is say, Lord, take this off. This is a limb that needs to be pruned. I need to get rid of this. Now, the beautiful thing is, that fruit still can pop up. I have given up my anger, and I am much less angry than I ever was. But can I still get angry? Oh, yeah. Every now and then, I see it creep in. But the neat thing is, I see it in a different light now. When I get angry, I go, whoa, this isn't a good thing. This is not something I'll cultivate. Even if I am in the right and someone is doing me wrong, being angry about it is not going to be healthy. And so I quickly say, no, that's not something I want to go down that road. The fruits of the Spirit will replace the fruits of the flesh. And whether we like it or not, our fruits will tell an awful lot about us. And I'm never one to judge, but I'm here to tell you, I think there's way too many folks out there that are living in the fruits of the flesh because I see their life and the misery that they're in. We will, in fact, display the fruits that are within us. And unless I choose willingly and knowingly to deny the fruits of the flesh and cultivate the fruits of the Spirit, I can still, to this day, create a bumper crop of evil. But if instead I decide to go for the fruits of the Spirit, I will find that it changes me. It makes me happier. It makes me a different person. You take the first fruit of the Spirit, love. Everybody wants love. And you know the truth of it is, what's the old songs? What this world needs now is more love. Couldn't be more true today than it ever was. But you know what? How many of us say, Lord, give me more love. Let my fruit be love. Let people hear and see love in my life. If you want to see more love, you produce more love. You want to see people healed? Start the healing process with yourself. I cannot, on my own accord, show love that I don't know how to experience. I grew up in an environment which was not very loving. It took me a long time to learn what love was. And the beautiful news is, my friends, if you've grown up in a similar environment, this Bible will tell you what love is. And that verse, John 3:16, speaks brilliantly of that love. For God so loved the world, a lost world. Jesus Christ died for the very same people who nailed him to a cross and pierced his side. That's what love looks like. It does not justify when I get angry. It does not justify when I decide that I am right, and so therefore I will treat them like garbage because they treat me like garbage. But I'm here to tell you, if you want to see more love, you show more love. Love is kind of like a drug. It can be addictive. If you practice it, you'll experience it. If you want to see more of it, show more of it. And I'm here to tell you, the next one isn't any more fun. Joy. I will tell you that in my first early life as a Christian, I could not understand when I read this verse. I saw Christians who had joy. Well, what is it different about them? Why can't I have joy? Why is it that I feel this anger? Why do I feel so tormented? And you know what? It made me mad. I got angry because I saw Christians with joy and I didn't have it. It was because I didn't understand. I can't have joy and anger at the same time. I can't produce crops of the flesh and expect fruits of the Spirit to grow on the same branch. I have to discard the fruits of the flesh. Joy was something that eluded me because I was still working on the flesh. I was still holding on to my rights. I wanted to still be justified in my anger. And the truth of it is, as long as I held on to that anger, Joy was never coming into my life. I will also tell you, as I released that anger, joy started to come into my life. Peace was exactly like joy for me. If you get an email from me, you will often find John 14 at the bottom as my signature. And it's a peace I give to you, a peace not as the world gives to you, but as a peace that supersedes the world. Peace was another thing that eluded me early in my Christian life. Again, I saw Christians who had it, and I'm going, I don't think so. I don't have that. How can they have it and I don't? And I get angry with God for that. And I think one of the things that we have to understand is I can't have peace and fruits of the flesh at the same time. My soul will not reside with both. The Bible is very clear. You do not get salt and fresh water from the same spring. If I am producing fruits of the flesh, it will not produce peace. I am reminded of Corrie ten Boom, and I don't know how many of you maybe not have heard of Corrie ten Boom, but she is a woman whose family held Jews through World War II and were caught and sent to concentration camps. And Corrie and her father were the only ones of her family that survived. And she went on to make a wonderful story out of her life called The Hiding Place. It's been made into a book and a movie. If you have never seen it, I highly recommend it. But Corrie ten Boom went around the world preaching forgiveness and love. And she said that at one event, when she was back in Germany, she was preaching forgiveness. And at the end of the service, people were invited to come down to be forgiven, to accept Jesus Christ. And she says, I saw a man stand, and as soon as he stood, I recognized him. He was one of the guards at her concentration camp. And instead of just walking down front, he walked right straight to her. And he came up to her and he offered his hand. And he says, do you know who I am? And Corrie barely choked out, yes. He says, I'm here to ask you your forgiveness. And Corrie ten Boom says, in every ounce of my being, I wanted to tell him, go away. No. She says, I just had spent 45 minutes preaching love and forgiveness. And yet every ounce of my being was saying no to this man. And she says, the Holy Spirit spoke loud and clear. Take his hand and say yes. And Corrie says, when she did that, something was released within her. There was something that even though she had been working on forgiveness, and I've always told you, and I've probably told you 1,000 times, and I'll tell you 1,001, forgiveness is like peeling an onion. You take a layer off of an onion and you set it on the counter. A week later, there's another layer to be peeled. So often it is with many things of the flesh, with forgiveness, with anger, with all the other things. We do it step by step. We do not have a one-step process. I believe that after having that experience, Corrie ten Boom saw forgiveness in a completely different light. She realized that no one was beyond forgiveness, that no one was beyond the ability of God to save. And my friends, I'm here to tell you, it is something that will develop in your life as you grow as a Christian. We do not have peace while we stay in the world. Patience is another virtue of the Spirit. And I'm here to tell you, it's one of those that if any of you have ever struggled with patience, you still do. You might be better at it than you were before, but you still struggle. And there's the old joke, never pray for patience, you know. If you do, you're going to get tons of opportunity to practice it. And there is truth in that. But I will tell you what the blessing is as you slowly do begin to develop that patience, you will find yourself letting go of a lot of other things that weren't all that important. The next fruit of the Spirit is kindness. And man, do I hear a lot of folks today saying, man, wish we could go back to the days when things were better, when people were kind to each other. I'm not that old. Well, some people would say I'm very old. But the truth of it is, I remember a much kinder time than what we have today. And I hear people lamenting, how would it be if we could go back to being a more kind people? And I think that's an excellent question. But I'm here to tell you the fruits of the flesh, anger, envy, lust, will kill kindness faster than anything. If I'm going to practice the fruits of the flesh, don't expect kindness to be part of that, your life. You want to see more kindness in this world? Just like love, practice it. Show it. Extend it in places it does not deserve to go. If we show kindness and love to people who do not deserve kindness and love, as is Corrie ten Boom, when she extended her hand to that prison guard, did he deserve it? No, he did not. But he needed it desperately. His guilt was weighing him down. And I suspect that his position with Christ depended on whether or not Corrie ten Boom would respond to him. If Corrie could forgive him, then the God she preached about could forgive him. You want to see a kinder world? Show more kindness. The other fruits of the Spirit: goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Galatians says there's no law against such things. And yet, they too become rarer and rarer every day. I don't know, my friends, what the world is going to go to. You do not have to turn on a TV set or a computer or open a newspaper very long before you see a world that looks pretty ugly. And in all fairness, it is going to be getting worse. How do I say that? I don't say that because I know so much. I say that because the Bible tells me that. It talks about the end of times. It says there will be wars and rumors of wars. Brother will turn against brother, father against son, mother against daughter. We will see a world of division, hatred. We will see a world full of the fruits of the flesh, because that is where a majority of this world is going. Now, if we want to change that, we must look to the fruits of the Spirit. We must say, God, I don't like what's going on. I don't like it when I see those things in me. I don't like it when I see them in others. Let's see if we can change that, God. And I'm here to tell you, we can and we will change things if we go to God. What I love about the Christian message is simply this: no one is beyond hope. No one can be denied if they desire to be changed. But I'm here to tell you, it will require change. John the Baptist wrote in Matthew 3:7-10, and it says, "But when he saw many of them, the Pharisees and Sadducees, coming to his baptism, he said to them, 'You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee the wrath to come? Bear fruit in keeping with repentance.'" Notice again the fruit. "And do not presume to say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our father.' For I tell you, God is able to, from these stones, to raise up children of Abraham. Even now the axe is laid at the root of the trees. Every tree, therefore, that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. My friends, a Christian should and will produce fruits of the Spirit. Being human, you will still see fruits of the flesh coming in. They will challenge you. You will have to overcome them. Like Corrie ten Boom, you will have those hesitation moments where you go, I don't think so. Or that fury of the anger or the envy or the lust. There's going to be those instances where you say, no, wait a minute, not what I want. And I have to stop and ask myself, do I want to serve the fruits of the flesh or the fruits of the Spirit? John was speaking to the Sadducees and the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day. These are the pastors, if you will. And what he is saying is, you're going to die and go to hell. Not the kind of thing you say to people when you want to make friends with them, is it? It's pretty much an insulting thing. These are the people that sit in the high seats. They wear the fancy robes. You will notice I don't wear robes, and that is intentional, because I never want to give you the impression that I'm any different from any one of you. If you're struggling, got to know this guy's struggling. You have troubles, this guy's got troubles. I never want to give you the impression that I somehow have something that you don't have. These folks thought they had something because of their titles, because of their position as religious leaders. And John says, you know what's going to happen to you? The axe is already at the root of your tree. You are going to be chopped down and you will go to hell. An uncomfortable message, to be sure, especially when this inclusive age where it says everyone goes to heaven, right? I wish that were true. But my Bible speaks very clearly about hell. If you look at your scriptures and what Jesus said, get our red letter Bible out, where all the Jesus words are in red. Jesus spoke more of hell than he did about heaven. The reality is, hell is real. Hell is going to be the destination of many. It is, in fact, where those who practice the fruits of the flesh are destined. It is, in fact, where each and every one of you and me were destined. If it were not for the love of Jesus Christ, we would all go to hell. Jesus offers us an opportunity. He says, come to me, ye who are weak and heavy laden, and I will give you peace. I will show you love. I will teach you a different way. My friends, you and I are going to produce fruit today. And I can't tell you what it is. I can tell you that I go out to my pear tree and I pick those pears and they are delicious. But there are some that are not. There are some that have worms. There are some that have got insects. There's some that have just rotted. And those pears are worth nothing except to perhaps be thrown on a compost pile. What you produce today will not only tell the world an awful lot about you, but it should tell you an awful lot about yourself. Do not be a Pharisee or a Sadducee who goes, well, you know, I'm a Christian, therefore I'm safe, I'm okay. The Quakers have an old practice. They've only been around since the 1600s. So many Quaker families can go back and say, my great-great-great-grandparent knew George Fox. He was one of the first Quakers, and they called themselves birthright Quakers. And I always laughed at them because it's like, and that gets you what? You know, it doesn't mean a thing. It's the same thing as a Pharisee or Sadducee. Being a birthright Quaker, being a Pharisee or Sadducee, being a church member for X amount of years gets you nowhere. You can't be saved by sitting in a pew. You are saved by the love of Jesus Christ. and the transition he will make in your life if you let him. You will bear fruit. And unfortunately, unless you're way different than me, some of that fruit's not going to be pretty. And I need to identify it quickly and say, ugh, that pear's rotten. Or this pear's good. Cling to the good. Let the fruits of the Spirit be more evident in your life so that when you are in the world, they will see those fruits of the Spirit. If you want to make this world a better place, be a better Christian. Show more love. Show more compassion. Show more kindness and gentleness. It is, in fact, what will draw most people in. I have not met too many Christians who said, I went and listened to a pastor and he just convinced me. The things that bring people into a church, I've seen that person live. I've seen them struggle through hardships. I've seen them do things, and yet they seem to have a love and a gentleness and a kindness and a peace. And I want to know what it is. When I was a young Christian and I saw all those Christians with that peace, it ate at me. It bugged me. Why can they have peace and I can't? Somehow I thought God was just denying me. And God was saying, no, Rick, you're refusing to accept it. You're hanging on to the fruits of the flesh. And the fruits of the flesh will not bear the same branch as fruits of the Spirit. You want peace? You have to get rid of the flesh. You have to give up your anger. You have to give up your envy. You have to give up all those fruits that God says are not good for you. And my friends, if you practice the fruits of the flesh, do not be surprised when people come to you and go, I don't know what it is you have, but please tell me what it is. I need it too. My friends, when you hear things like that, you know the fruits of the Spirit are in your life. This world needs more fruit of the flesh.